Okay, today is October 31st, 2007, Halloween. I'm in Oklahoma City. My name's Tanya Finchum, and we'll be talking with Odilia Dank, who was in the House of Representatives, elected in 1994 and finished in 2007. Termed out, correct? Mm-hmm. And this is part of the OSU Library's project entitled Women of the Oklahoma Legislature. So thank you for allowing me to come visit you today.
I think I termed out. I finished the session in 2006.
Okay.
So I guess that would...
We'll change that then. Okay. So you were elected in 94 and
12 years
12
later.
years later you finished.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, so let's start by having you tell a little bit about your childhood, where you were born, siblings, that type of thing.
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but we moved when I was 2 years old. So I consider myself from Oklahoma and a Sooner type person that just believes in Oklahoma all the way. I have one older sister, and I have a younger brother and sister that are twins. And we grew up on the northeast side of Oklahoma City at a little Lake Aluma, Chalosa, which was a little township, a small lake with some houses around it. Not many children at all. There were the four of us and two boys that lived out there. My dad was a radiologist, and my mother had been a dentist for 10 years before she got married. And she didn't practice after that, but I used to tease her. She was one of the first women livers. She said she didn't like doing dentistry. She was the only woman in her class, but anyway, she was a dentist. I went to high school at Cassidy High School when it was a very young school. I went to college at Randolph-Macon Women's College in Virginia. Then I came back to OU and got my master's in education, and I had taught for 8 years, and then I became a counselor, and I spent 5 years at a junior high and my last 12 years at a high school. And so that would be my education part of it. As far as work, and my career mainly was my job, being a good teacher and being a good counselor and raising my daughter. And so I just pretty well had telescopic vision, or very narrow vision, I should say, at that point, just concentrating on those two things. I did belong to my church, and I also belonged to some of the education organizations. My interest in politics, who would have ever dreamed I would be in the legislature in Oklahoma? Never was that ever a goal of mine when I was growing up. But I will say that I always loved social studies, and my first teaching job in South Oklahoma City was teaching government for one semester and Oklahoma history for the other semester. And since I had been in private schools, I had not really traveled around Oklahoma much or studied Oklahoma much. So it seemed like many weekends, this other teacher and I would take trips around Oklahoma. So I had a real appreciation for our history. But anyway, I had a father that was patriotic and interested in politics and what was going on in the world around us, and that often generated conversation at the dinner table. So anyway, as we go along, Mary Fallon initially had this seat that I was in for 12 years, House District 85. And when she aspired onward and upward to become the lieutenant governor in Oklahoma, it left an opening, a vacuum. And my husband used to always say, what this state needs are some more conservative women in the legislature. And one day I said to him, well, what about me? And he said, well, I wasn't talking about you, but anyway, he has been most supportive all the way through. And so I kind of combined my love in education for social studies with thinking that people had been so disgusted, me included, with some of the things our legislature had done back then, that instead of complaining, maybe one ought to try to jump right in and help change things if at all possible. And the first year I campaigned and knocked on doors, I can remember so many people saying, why would you want to go out to that zoo out there? And they'd make comments like that. And so it reminded me, the people had to step in and put in term limits. They had to step in and cut the the session back and make it just January through May for us to get our work done. Enough of this nonsense of covering up the clock and going, 24 hours and going all year and whatever. And so anyway, for 10 years, I was in the minority, served with the minority. Actually, a minority in a minority, because the women were minority, any way you looked at it. And when I started, there were 3 Republican women. 3 of us were Republican women. And in 94, 13 Republicans were elected to the House, which gave our Republican governor veto proof. So if he vetoed something, it could not be overridden if we all stood together. And we did, 38 of us. And so that was our little bit of power that we had, which would come toward the end of session when he would sign or veto bills. The last 2 years, I had the privilege of serving in the majority, the first Republican majority since 1921, and it was only 2 years long then. And it was a real challenge, and it was so different because all of a sudden our bills were heard in committees, and they got to the floor, and we actually passed some things. And being a Republican and being conservative, I do believe that we were taxed too much and we needed to lower taxes, not at the expense of any of the things that government is supposed to do, like education and public safety and taking care of our children. But that was one thing I would hear over and over again was every which way you look, there were taxes. And in the district that I represented, the majority was made up of conservatives. Whether they be Democrats or Republicans, we all seem to think alike. So when I was campaigning, and even when I served, in my mind, I separated between what would be conservatives and liberals, rather than Democrats and Republicans. And so anyway, also one other thing that I did, I ran for the vice chairman of the Oklahoma State Republican Party and won that and served 2 terms there. And so by the time I ended my career, I was the chairman of the House Education Committee. And that was a privilege that the speaker would appoint me to that. And so I felt honored to serve there.
Were there other women on that one, on that particular committee?
Yes, definitely. Uh-huh.
More so than others, I guess.
I don't know if that would be true or not, because there are some retired educators, superintendents. Seems to me in our state, back when I was a counselor, so many more were male superintendents. And so you see some men that are very interested in education. So it wasn't predominantly women at all, but it was a nice mixture, indeed.
And how many women were in your first session?
In 94?
In 94.
Oh, gee, you may have that. I'm trying to think. I know that I started with 3 Republican women, and there were more. Were there 7 or 9 Democrat women?
I don't know about their politics.
Barbara was Democrat.
Betty Boyd.
Yes.
Wanda Joe.
Yes, definitely.
Laura Boyd.
Yes, definitely.
Jerry Askew.
Uh-huh.
Carolyn Coleman.
No, she was a Republican.
And Joanne Greenwood.
She was a Republican.
And Debbie Blackburn.
So she was a Democrat. So that's 6 women that were Democrats and 3, if I'm still right, that were Republicans.
Mm-hmm. What was it like being one of the few women in the House at that time?
At times, to me, it was somewhat lonely because you're not able to network like the men do. That was one thing. You didn't feel like you were in with the stream of things, so to speak. I think with time that has certainly improved, but being one of just 3 Republican women, and the other 2 had been there a while, and they both came from the south side of Oklahoma City, so they have a great deal in common. I came from the north side of Oklahoma City, and so we didn't have a lot in common. The other thing was that as far as being able to go out and do things together. You know, you don't go to men and say, let's go to dinner or lunch or something without a group type thing. So socially, I think, and me being from Oklahoma City, it didn't matter either because I always went home to my husband at night. And we would go to things together, a few things. The other thing is, at the very beginning, and it's not true so much now, but at the very beginning, I still detected a few men who thought it was still a men's world out there. And they never said anything. You know, it's just kind of either the way they treat you or their attitude or whatever. And there were a few that, you know, felt that way, and there were others much more modern, you know. Sex didn't make a difference at all. And I think that has really changed over the years. I've noticed that.
And those 12 years
Uh-huh.
made a difference, huh?
Yes. And I think it's more not whether you're male or female, but how competent you are. And I've always been a huge supporter of that. I did not want anybody to promote me or do anything in deference to me just because I was a woman. I wanted to do it because I was competent and the best one for the job, so to speak.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about your first campaign then. Did you have a slogan?
I did, and I kept it for 12 years. And when I first said I wanted to do it, everybody said, that's so corny. And I said, that's what people remember. It was Bank on Odilia Dank, or Bank on Dank.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, when I knew it had caught on, one little boy was in his car with his mother, and of course we had all kind of signs out because there were 6 Republicans running in the primary.
In the first, okay.
For the first time around, because there was a vacuum there, an open seat. And so we really had success getting out our campaign signs. People were very good to let us put them in their yards and whatever. And this little boy said to his mother, Bank on Dank, what does that mean? And she was telling me about that. And then a few campaigns down later, people would holler, Bank on Dank. And so I kept that all 12 years.
Did you have colors? Colors, something particular?
Definitely colors. I had blue predominantly and some red and white. Tried to be very patriotic. And, you know, little things like that are big decisions because you put a lot of money into signs. And some signs don't show up well. And when you're inexperienced with campaigning, we used to put them up on the fireplace and compare which one we liked better, you know. And my husband was always part of the decision because he had been in the journalism business, had owned a paper, or had some experience with campaigning more than I had. So, yeah, I kept those colors all the way through.
Did you have a manager?
We did. Interestingly enough, it was a young man who was a student at UCO, but more in name and more of a worker to help me go through the neighborhoods. My husband really was the campaign manager. As far as the brains behind it, he and I pretty well did our own campaign. And the young man was very good, but, you know, he was inexperienced also and young. And so that's the way we did it.
Did your daughter help campaign?
She's more apolitical, and so she did the first year. Of course, she was starting her own career as a medical doctor, and then she started having babies, so she really had another life and didn't live here. So I do remember the first time I campaigned, she drove me through some neighborhoods, so she was involved when she could be like that.
Do you have any favorite campaign stories?
Let's
Jump out.
Let's see. I will say this. It's been so humbling to me and amazing that people will still come up to me and say, I remember the first time you knocked on my door. And that you start a day and you think, oh no, because it's so hard work knocking on doors day after day, and a lot of times people aren't home. And I would just think, oh, I don't know if I can do it today. And then you'd meet one person who was home and they would just energize you. I've got to do more, because it really restores your faith in people, I think. Because the majority of people, what they call the silent majority, is really out there. And they do care. And they I just still trust the people after all these years. If you give them the facts and don't confuse them, they will do the right thing. And so many people were so receptive and take your literature. And I never said, will you vote for me? I just would ask them to consider and to look at my literature. And so people would often say, well, what do your polls show? Well, I didn't ever take polls. And I didn't keep track either. Sometimes, you'd run back and put it on your computer, or whatever. I just didn't do that. I just concentrated on getting to as many people as I could. And the main thing that was coming to my mind is the little boy in the car saying he was reading the sign.
Well, what was election night like the first time?
Well, it was very interesting because we had to go through a primary. So I had almost won the primary. I had just missed by like 0.4% of a vote or whatever. And very slim margin. But when we got to the runoff, it became more of a knockdown, drag-out fight. And it was surprising to me because we were both Republicans. And I didn't know about negative campaigning, that Republicans would really do that against Republicans. And there was a piece put out the night, let me think how it was, a few days before the election, that was, the strategy was to criticize my husband and tell things about him to take me down. And so when I was out putting out my flyers, we came across these. And so you have to decide whether you're going to ignore those kind of pieces or whether you're going to answer them, because what we learned through experience was that if you say nothing, then people believe that as the facts. And so we strained over that, and so anyway, we decided to answer it and explain. And half-truths are sometimes as bad as a complete lie. So anyway, election night, back to your question, it was nip and tuck. And at one point I was losing. And I knew that when I looked at my husband's face. I've never seen that expression on his face before. And it came down to one precinct and the absentee ballots. And I did win. And I think I ended up winning by like 52 votes or something like that. When they say every vote counts, it's the truth. And so I then realized how close I had come, and I had not paid that much attention. Like I told you, I didn't keep track of numbers or polls or anything. And so I just kept thinking about what I was supposed to do each day and just working really hard. And people did comment later after I was elected that I had worked so hard. Well, I didn't really know what they meant because I didn't think I was working any harder than anybody else. But a campaign takes on legs of its own, and you just eat, sleep, and breathe it for 24 hours a day, and you have to kind of put your life aside. Then I had a Democrat opponent, and he was an attorney, and as I told you, my district is it's conservative. And I would say moderate conservative to conservative, and so I didn't have any trouble there. But when I got out to the legislature, then I suddenly realized that it really was an honor that people had given me, and that not many people have that privilege, and that I promised myself I would never forget that. And so every election time, at the end of the session, and we were going into the election cycle, I would look around that House chamber and say, some of us will not be here next time, and I never take this for granted, but I might not be here next time. And I have been so privileged to be here this much. So I tried always to be grateful for what the people entrusted to me.
Was each campaign a little different? I'm sure the first one was probably the hardest one, the second one.
And indeed, there were two. 12 years is 6 elections, and out of those 6, 2 I did not have an opponent at all. And that was a blessing that I never took for granted either, because I realized that that meant that people still trusted me and I could not, breach their trust. But the next one wasn't a serious candidate. I've never had a Republican since then, the first election.
Okay.
And the next one was not too serious, but I didn't know it. So we went after a gnat with a cannonball and, a full force hard work and the whole thing. The last one, which would have been 2004, was the most developed Democrat campaign against me. And it was a young woman teacher. So you had an educator and an educator, a woman and a woman. And just different philosophies. But when redistricting happened in 2000, they changed the complexion of House District 85 to where it had more of your clear Democrats, your decidedly definite Democrats that just vote Democrat. And so, and there were some leaders of the Democrat Party that live in our district and still do, like Governor David Walters and Mike Turpin and Jim Roth. And so they have an influence that is a predominant presence there. And so there was more support with a Democrat candidate than there had been before. And so the first and last campaigns were the hardest.
Well, what do you think made the difference in the last one then, with party or?
I think that
party?
just they fielded the best candidate that they had in those 12 years. And interestingly enough, she ran against my husband in 06.
Hmm.
Yes, and that's when, there was this huge Democrat wave coming across Oklahoma, and Republicans lost ground in many areas, especially statewide elected offices. But in the House, we didn't. We held the number that we had there in the majority. But so that was her best chance to win. And he had a very contentious primary also, like I had the first time. So.
We'll come back to him in just a minute.
Interesting.
How much do you remember you spending on your first one? Around?
I'm going to say between $35,000 and $45,000, maybe up to $50,000, but definitely not over that.
And then the last one.
And then the last one, times have really changed, and it takes a lot more nowadays. And I'm trying to remember, I think between maybe 85 and, it's been a long time since I thought of that.
Maybe doubled at least.
Yes, yes, I would say that.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you describe your thoughts and feelings on the day you were sworn in the first time?
I think I can, because I'll never forget how that is a once in a lifetime unique experience, and it's just absolutely overwhelming almost, because you're sitting on the floor of the part of the seat of power in Oklahoma, and the galleries are packed with all these people cheering and everything. And you're swearing to not only abide by the Constitution of Oklahoma, but the United States of America. And it just suddenly hit me that it's a tremendous responsibility, and that there are a lot of people to whom you owe a very accountable 2 years. And that Capitol building, just walking into it is just, to me, so overwhelming and awesome, that even sets the mood for when you first walk in. I had been out there once before in the gallery to watch the House many years ago with no other idea than I don't know if I took some students or what, But the first time I was to go out there, I remember I felt like an airplane circling. I went through the wrong roads and things, and had to go back and find the right path to the house parking lot. But being sworn in by one of the Supreme Court judges, and looking around and seeing 101 members, it's one of those experiences of life, like when you get married or you have children, or it's one of those great ahas of life that I guess those other things, a lot of people do those things, so then this is more unique. But it's just a thrilling, unforgettable experience. But with it comes suddenly the feeling of a responsibility, not just to my family or my husband or anything like that, or friends, but to a whole group of people. When you think you represent 35,000 people and they put you there, all of a sudden it dawns on you that this is not a free ride. People would always say after that swearing in, "Are you enjoying yourself?" Well, sometimes you are and sometimes you aren't, just trying to do the right thing.
Well, describe a typical day. How early would you get there, and how late would you have to stay?
A typical day in the middle of the session, maybe get there 7:30, somewhere along in there. And maybe we'd be through around 4 or 5, depending on what committees you had. But lots of phone calls and lots of reading, just tremendous amount of reading. Whether it's bills in your committee or those that are going to be on the floor that day, or stacks of mail from agencies and constituents and groups that have legislation. Just to keep up with the reading is absolutely tremendous challenge. And so then they're always, your day's never really planned all the way. I mean, you go to committee meetings at a certain time or session at a certain time, but people drop in all the time, and you never know how long that will take. And so there's always every day. It's never boredom, never routine. I mean, it's a whole new day every day on what's going to happen that day.
You probably do lunch in most days.
I did, for sure, because I used that time to do a lot of reading. So I did not like to leave the building. I just preferred to keep my head to the grind and keep up, because I was very big on reading bills. Now, some make a choice whether they're going to do that or not, or rely on other people to tell them what's in bills. But I had a most memorable experience, and it'll take a little bit to explain, and then we'll go from there. But in 98, let me try again, 97, 98, somewhere in there, at the end of session, the routine has been in Oklahoma that all the important legislation is saved for the last 2 days. Because the last 2 days, they can bring any piece of legislation that's come out of conference. And we could have 50 bills on our desk that are put there as we're down on the floor. So in that year, and I believe 98, I had been waiting for the J.D. McCarty funding because I was very interested in that particular facility getting its money. And we got there, and I couldn't find the bill on my desk. So I raised my hand and, "Hold it, I don't have a bill." Well, everything came to a screeching halt, silence. And the majority leader, who at that time sat up front, and I was in the back, you sit in the back when you're new, said, "I've got one up here." So I started up front, because I had asked all around me. Nobody had a bill. I thought maybe I'd misplaced it. So I checked first. So I start up there, and he goes and leaves the chamber. I found out later not even the speaker had a bill. So I began to talk about that we should have time to read the bills to know what we're voting on. And so I was saying, it seems to me we ought to have 24 hours to read the bills. mull them over, digest them, let them be checked with people who are going to be affected by it, and make sure we didn't have any unintended consequences. Well, I came to find out in the Constitution of Oklahoma, it says no bill will be passed in its final form until it's read from beginning to end at length. And there's where the rub was, because it became interpreted then to mean what? It's not really practical to sit up there and read each bill like they did at the beginning before they had copy machines, fax machines, whatever. But to me, no matter, we needed time to see what the heck we were voting on. And especially when we're spending millions of dollars, it's like a blank check if you don't know what you're doing. So I tried going up the chain of command in the proper way. I tried changing the House rules. Now, we were in the minority, so of course I, was outvoted and not heard. I tried the joint rules when we were in joint session, which was not very often. And I was tabled on that, and absolutely not. So then I went to the Attorney General for a ruling. And his ruling was, yes, it's in the Constitution, but and of course his ruling does not have any force of law or anything, it's merely an opinion. So my husband and I decided we would go to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, which we did. And we paid for it ourselves, and we got a very capable attorney. And they didn't rule, and they didn't rule until I think it was right before the session was to end in May of maybe 2000. And I had given them all these examples of bills that we had passed in the last 2 days. And one of them was this huge truth in sentencing bill that turned our entire criminal code upside down. It had, and nobody had time to read it. They had a recess of 30 minutes, 45 minutes to peruse this when they brought it to us. And we made it law. It was a disaster. It was to go into effect the next July. We postponed it till the next July. We had to have a special session, and the day or two before it was to go into effect, we undid it. It took all that work to undo something that just, to me, wasn't handled correctly. I gave the Supreme Court examples of how at one point, the last day, we were taking a bill every 3 minutes. It was being presented and questions and voted on in the next one. Some of them were hot off the press. They were still warm when they were being passed out. Well, the Supreme Court ruled against me. And there are reasons I think that happened, but their reasoning was that this was an internal issue with the House. It was not a constitutional issue, and that they were breaching the separation of powers. What was very interesting was that after that, the Speaker always made sure that we had 24 hours, except for the last 2 days. And that has continued. It's continuing to this day. And that is something that needs to be fixed. Because in my opinion, the last day or two should be to clean up things, emergencies. Something we did wrong in a bill that's got to be corrected because of something that's getting ready to happen soon. The trick has been, if you want to pass something and it's onerous, put it in a bill that has some really good stuff in it, and then how can they vote against it, and they won't have time to read it either. And it was jokingly called woolly boogers that were put in these bills at the last minute. It was a joke. Can you find the woolly booger? And I guess I took it much more serious than that. And there have been some things that have been detrimental to, in my opinion, to the people of Oklahoma in this way. So I'm hopeful, as we're in the majority, if we ever get the Senate, that we'll be able to do something about the last 2 days. In my book, it's a travesty. So
Your husband will carry that torch on a little.
I'm hoping.
Sure, we'll try a little bit. So what other committees were you a member of?
I started out, I've always been on education, and I've been on a children and family type thing, corrections. But revenue and taxation and education were the two that were very important to me the last 2 years, because I have believed that with, for example, ad valorem taxes, that we should freeze that on seniors till they move out of their house, because they have things that happen to them that their fixed income does not control. And one of the big things they seem to all have is prescription drugs, which we all know cost outrageous. And seniors have called me every year, and some of them afraid of losing their home because they can't pay their taxes. So that was a very important committee to me. And the education committee was my love. And my big thrust there was to try education reform in certain ways for the schools, public schools of Oklahoma, because our kids have been behind, and they couldn't read and they couldn't do math when I got out there. We don't have good scores. And so by the end of my term, we had passed a very rigorous curriculum. And if we can just keep it intact, where kids would be prepared to go to college or the world of work after they get out of high school, that was always my goal. And many other people, because we passed that. And we have a steering committee following along with that now, to try to see where the problems are and see if we can implement that.
Any other successful bills from your standpoint that you pushed?
Oh, yes. Parental notification was important to me, because we had parental consent passed when I was first in the legislature. But having been a high school counselor and not being able to give a child an aspirin without a parent's permission, it seemed to me that a parent ought to be notified if their daughter was going to have an abortion, because that's a huge life-changing experience. And I had some experiences as a high school counselor that were unpleasant, and often parents didn't know. And they're the main one that can help a child, except for some unusual situations. And we had put into that bill for the exceptions that a judge could, under certain conditions, help that girl if she was in an abusive family or whatever was the unusual situation. And so I have the health and the well-being of children and the unborn has been something that I thought was important from the parental notification position.
Any major disappointments besides the reading the bill in the last 2 days?
Yes, I got the ad valorem tax freeze on senior citizens through the House, but the Senate would not even give it a hearing, and that was a big disappointment to me, because we all have senior citizens in our districts, and it, in my opinion, boils down to some very special interest groups that have a great deal of power. And the argument has always been, you're going to cause education to suffer. And it's not taking anything away from education, and it's the increase. And it's only where senior citizens are concerned. And as we're growing businesses, and at the time, our homes were booming. We have apartments being built all the time, and homes and everything. Our base has been growing, and that's, to me, the key of the ad valorem being supportive of education, but not on the backs of senior citizens. So I was disappointed with that. We did get tax cuts in on income tax, but the disappointment was that the compromise was, yes, we'll put this in a bill. We'll cut taxes down to 5.65%, but we're only going to start it in 2010. So that's the way we do some things also.
Let me back up a bit too. I meant to ask you if you had a mentor in the political arena, role model, anyone you aspired to.
Well, I would say Mary Fallon was certainly a role model. Now, she was starting her own new career as a lieutenant governor. Mm-hmm. So mentor as such, not really. And maybe I didn't seek out one either. But we didn't have a setup like that in the House either. I think they have more of a setup now to do that. We had group things like orientation, or members who were always helpful individually if you asked for help. But there wasn't a designated thing like that at all.
Well, growing up, did you have a role model then?
Oh, I definitely did. My dad and mom. And believe it or not, my husband is a role model, I think. My dad was a self-made man who in grade school, a teacher told him he'd never amount to anything. And his mother would tell him that too. You know how boys, I guess, are naughty from time to time. But he became a doctor because that's really what he wanted to do. And my parents stayed married to each other all the years they were alive, and raised 4 of us that did not give them any trouble, and I think that's to their tribute too. But they showed us how to live and the work ethic and the value of religion and what family means and things like that. My husband, on the other hand, I admire for his, he has a political acumen that not many people have, I don't think. And he has a financial human computer up there. And I've just observed him over the years that we've been married, of the way he's lived his life, and he's always been a fair person, a generous person. He's always giving money to even the person who brings out the groceries. So I have learned to do that from him. Never thought about it before. And so I feel like I've learned a lot of things from him. And yet he can make a fist. And people tease that they'll say, he's so wishy-washy, you never can tell where he stands. I learned to stand up stronger for what I believed in. And he has always been supportive. Except for one time when I came home, having been at the Legislature late at night, because the closer you get to the end of May, sometimes you have late nights. And he said, "How did you vote on that bill, so-and-so?" And I told him, he said, "Good, because if you didn't, I was going to run against you." And so he even told me what he thought. But I have learned from him. The teacher I remember that was a role model for me was a 4th grade teacher in a little old country school where we went, who was the strongest grammar teacher I would ever know. And I went to a private high school, the best my parents could find, because they knew education was the key to our future, and so they sacrificed so we could go to the best private school they could find, because that was the best school at the time in the area. Mm-hmm. And in all that education, she was the best teacher, grammar teacher. And then I have a friend that was a counselor with me, and I still meet her for lunch from time to time. And in some ways, she doesn't even know this, but she's a role model, because she is a marvelous woman with a lot of logical reasoning. Mm-hmm. And so I have a lot of role models, and I look constantly for them. One of the places I look is in the sports page, too, with some of these, looking for role models for my grandchildren now. But some of these football players have had such hard lives, and how they have been so strong and made it. And I guess I think on days when I'm having a bad day and, you do your poor me thing and you think about other people, I think that's when I see them as a role model, what they've lived through.
Good answer.
I'm rambling, but there's
you're
not just one role model. There's so many around.
That's good. I have a note on here to ask about the Murrah Bomb building because it occurred when you were in office.
Just right after we were sworn in.
What do you remember about?
Yeah, and I remember Governor Keating. I mean, it was his first year just, learning to be a governor. And how marvelous he was, and his wife, and how much of a leader they were, both of them together for us. But it was kind of frightening because at the time I was on the second floor of the Department of Labor, and there was a noise, and the picture shook a little bit, and we were wondering, was it an earthquake or a tornado starting or what? And when you looked out the window, you saw that smoke. And then when we went to the Capitol, we were in session when they called us into session, emergency. And one of the men had just dropped off his child down there on that street where the Murrah building was. And so he kind of gave us a firsthand description of what had happened to him. And then we adjourned because immediately the question was, would it go somewhere else? Would they be after the government? Would they be after the Capitol or whatever? So we adjourned and left the building. And of course I remember, like others did, seeing all that we went through after that.
How soon after that did the session start back up? Do you? I mean, I could look, but it's
well. I think that it was the next day. After
it
was determined what had happened, and we did not indefinitely adjourn. So and I don't know what day that was. If it might have been a Thursday, see, we didn't meet on Fridays, so I don't really remember what day of the week that would have been. But it wasn't an indefinite thing. It wasn't that scary once you realized what had happened, once they pieced together. It was just frightening as far as incomprehensible, I guess you'd say, that could happen.
Well, and then you were there through the time when they were debating whether or not to do the trial for Nichols again.
Yes, and that didn't involve us really, other than to follow it. And I did serve with Charlie Key, who at the time felt like, there might have been something to the fact that there might have been more than one person involved with that. But that didn't seem to take much hold out at the legislature, and we just kept going about our business.
Well, do you have any thoughts or advice for women that are thinking about going into the political arena?
I just would encourage anyone that has any political interest to do it. We do need more women in government. I think women have some special things to offer. I don't think we're as easily swayed as men. I think our attention diverted, I should say, and we pay attention to detail, and very serious about our work. But it seems to me that there are a great amount of women in Oklahoma that put family first. So they want to raise their family. And I commend them for that. But I say there's life after your children fly the coop too. And you're not too old to do that. But you can certainly get involved when you're younger with the party and with campaigns and helping good people get elected, because we must continue to elect good people, because we know what happens when you don't do that. And a good example of a young woman that puts her family first, when I term limited, we tried to convince this young woman to run. She had been out there as an assistant, and she knew the system, and she was so good, and she was in the private business world, so she knew that. And she said, let me think about it. And the next day she said, I haven't completely raised my child. She had 2 children. One was pretty well on its way, but I haven't completely raised my daughter. And I need to do that first. That's my priority. And I admired her for that so much because she's young enough. She was a single parent, but she will someday maybe be, at a stage of her life where she'll get back into politics again. So I always encourage them. We had a young woman in this last campaign for David that is just wonderful, and she's so politically oriented that I think she'll run someday. I really do. And we certainly encourage that.
You'll be a role model for her.
Maybe so, if she thinks I know some things.
That brings us to an interesting point, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it a little bit. Since your husband has run for you turned out, and then your husband ran and won the seat. How was that? What was that like being flip-flopped, the roles being flip-flopped?
It was certainly different. The whole time I was out at the legislature, I almost felt like when I stepped into that Capitol, it was like another world. And I also felt like it was almost as if God had some part in me being out there. I would say, what am I doing out here sometimes? And there are the frustrations and there are the joys and there, the stress and all of that. But it was like I was in a different world and in a dreamland. When I was term limited and having to make the shift back to just being a public citizen, I didn't have time to have withdrawals or feel sorry or have any depression because we went immediately into a campaign. And as we've talked before, I mean, the campaign takes legs of its own and wants you body and soul for 24 hours a day. So we would work so hard and be so tired by the end of the day, you really slept well. So it wasn't until after he was elected and sworn in and started the session that it occurred to me they were going to go on without me. And that was okay. It was just different. I wasn't the one going out there anymore. He was. And he would be the one that would be carried high and paid attention to and, all of that, which I'm very happy for him because he worked hard and will do a good job. But the thing I really miss, I don't miss having to be a public figure and keeping up with the strenuous schedule. I miss the people, and that's what I hadn't anticipated. So I did go out for the swearing in, and then I left because I guess I'm a coward or something. I thought it's going to be sad if I start running into people. But when I've gone back out there, it has been so gratifying to know that people would say, I miss you, like, not, I'm glad you left, we're glad to get rid of you or anything. It was just so nice that people, that I started realizing that's what I really missed, was that everyday camaraderie and seeing the same people and talking with them.
Not just men, but women too?
Oh, both. Oh, definitely. And there are some really good people out there. And I always viewed myself as a citizen legislator. It was not my whole life. We had a wonderful full-blown life outside of the legislature, although at the time, and especially during session, it took my undivided attention and time. Every time I ran, I would say, well, God, I just say a little prayer that I'd like to do it again. But if not, we had a full life, that the world wasn't going to end. And what has happened is I haven't had time to be bored or say, oh no, woe is me, what am I going to do? Because my husband and I have traded positions. I'm now down at the business office every day, So I'm involved with that and he's doing the other thing. So it took me probably 4 or 5 months just to catch up with stuff I had pushed aside or stacked, and it needs to be organized. I need to catch up with things I put off. And so I'm just now, starting to, probably 1st of June or July, I just started, having time to relax and smell the roses.
So we'll get back to your husband a little bit. Was the campaign a little bit different between your running and his running?
Yes. And one of the things we had to do was separate the two of us now. You know, we'd run, he had supported me, but I'd always been in the forefront. And when I first ran, people would say that were against me, you know, he's going to be the one telling her what to do. Well, when he ran, then the ones that didn't like us would say, or were on the other side is what I should say, wanted their candidate to win, would say, you know, she's the one that's going to be telling him what to do. So, also, they'd say, well, now, are they trying to have a Dank dynasty or what? What is this? That would be what the other side would say. One person at the door with one of our volunteers. We had 3 young college students this time that were just marvelous. 3 young men that are so politically astute, and they're leaders in student government. They were at the junior college. They now are at UCO, and they are up there involved. They're going to be some of the leaders in our state someday, and we just encourage them and love them. But they work so hard in this campaign, and one of them went to the door, and the person said, now, I thought we believed in term limits, and I thought Odilia believed in term limits. Now, why is he running? We're just going to extend this Dank thing. And the young man, who is very sharp, said, you know, David has never run before, and he is an individual. And so just look at him and what he stands for and see what you think, if he's the better candidate. And I just applauded that young man. I was very impressed with, he kept his cool, he was very poised, and he gave a good answer, I thought. But we had a unique campaign from another angle in that David was running against a Keating. So neither side could use the argument, well, you know, he's using her name. Well, he's using his dad's name. His signs were just like his dad's. And David's were different than mine, but the same colors. So that made it kind of interesting that the former governor was out knocking doors on weekends. So we were up against a pretty formidable opponent in the primary. And so it was interesting from that angle also. And his son, the governor's son, had moved into our district specifically to run. He had come about 2 years before. And of course, we've lived in the district for years and years and years. And so it was pretty interesting. And I don't know if you want to know in the specifics of it, but one example would be Chip Keating had on his literature, you know, he protected the public for 3 years as a highway patrolman. Well, David had a flyer with 5 retired patrolmen. One was a major, and that have known David forever. I mean, he just didn't go find these people and say, do you like what I'm doing and will you vouch for me? Mm-hmm. These have been friends of his forever, and they spoke on the area of law enforcement where David was concerned. So each one had an answer for the other, you know, as far as qualifications. Chip said he graduated from Bishop McGinnis. Well, he didn't know David had graduated from Bishop McGinnis. So we had families where the kids were for Chip, his age group. Mm-hmm. The parents were for David. And so we had one yard where our sign was up, and then it was down, and Chip's was up, and then the next week ours was up. And we finally figured out, you know, and talked to them, and the son had gone to school with Chip.
Gender differences, not gender, generation.
Generational differences. We both went to the same church. And but we had been there for years and years and years, you know, and he had come. And so it was an interesting campaign, and David won the primary, and there were 4 Republicans in the primary. He skidded through there with 25 votes.
Oh, gosh.
So we were calling him Landslide Dank. And then he went to 87 votes. He beat Chip in the runoff. And then he had a very contentious Democrat with the woman educator I was telling you about, and he won that one by 127 or something like that. So he would tease me because I won by the runoff by 52, and he only won by 25. But he said, but I over doubled mine when I got going. But every voter that will go to the polls could be that one that makes a difference. And to impress that on people is hard to do because, you know, we have such a small percentage of people that actually vote.
Or does he approach his typical day any different than yours, than you did?
We have a totally different style.
Okay.
As he says, he bounces off of walls and he's extremely passionate. But our philosophy is the same.
Okay. Which is?
And it has to do with trying to make a change out at the legislature for the good of our kids and grandkids. We want them to live in this state. And we don't want to leave them with a burden. And this state is so in debt right now. And every time we do a bond issue, we're just indebting our children more. He has the advantage of the Senate being even Steven split. So he can get something passed in the House and maybe get it through the Senate. And so, for example, we both have been very high on ethics. But that is at the top of his list now. They would never have time for my ethics bills, never had a hearing. But we both have always believed you should not take money during the session because of the perception. And I'm not talking about $50 or $200, but you have to make a rule because of the big bucks that are being passed out, like $1,000, $2,000, but the amount of $5,000 contributions from special interests gives the perception that you're paying to have some legislation brought forward. And perception out there, whether you like it or not, is the reality. And so now that we're in charge, and he makes no distinction between Democrats or Republicans, this is the way it should be. And that you should have plenty of time outside of that to collect money. And people will give you money if you do the right thing and what you believe is right. The people that support you are going to be there. The argument has been made that, oh, well, then the people running against me are going to get ahead of me. Well, his bill says anybody running for the legislature, whether it's an incumbent that's in the seat now or any new person, anybody cannot do any fundraising there during the session or 15 days before or 15 days after. That there's plenty of time to do that. We have a lot of special interests that are they always have been there. That it shouldn't be that way because the people kind of get left out. They don't have lobbyists out there as such. And for example, one of my biggest disappointments that I didn't mention is the very contentious vote we had on whether to send the gambling bill to the people to vote on. And it had to do with, in Oklahoma, we had Class 2 gambling, which had to do with bingo connected type things. And the Indians wanted Class 3 gambling, which is more like Las Vegas. And we had at that time over 80 casinos in the state. And it was all sold on for education. That what we're going to do is we're going to allow Class 3 in certain instances in some of these card games. And then for the first time, the Indians are going to have to pay some taxes on these new games. Not the old ones, not all the old ones they have, just these new ones. And they're going to pay 2% to 4%, maybe up to 6% to the state if you have these new games. And if an Indian tribe decided not to have those new games, they didn't pay taxes still. And we'll let Remington Park and the one over in Tulsa, Fair Meadows, have a certain kind of games, and they're going to pay 10% to the state. And they can't have the new games. And we're going to have a compact with the Indians and everybody that this is the way it's going to be for 15 years, and the legislature cannot change one thing. And that's what we sent to the people. And there were 4 people that flipped over to vote to send that to the people. And my side, the side I was on, didn't feel the people would understand what all the repercussions were and what this was going to do to Oklahoma. And so the whole deal was for education. They're going to get all this money because we're going to take, and the lottery. Remember, the lottery was there too. And that was the other disappointment, that went to the people about at the same time. It was projected we were going to have $300 million. Then it was projected we'd have $150 million. We have never met those. The raise for teachers was going to be paid for by the lottery. And we were going to put money into 5% of what was left, after you paid all the people that run the lottery and everything. And so then if it's 35% or 45% that's left for the state, we're going to divide it, we're going to give this much of our amount to teachers' raises, this much to higher ed, this much to the teachers' retirement, like that. Every year the legislatures had to put money in because we haven't even been able to pay for the raise we gave to the teachers. Because the lottery has not met its goals. And the Indians have not gone hog wild over these class 3. Now, some of them, the bigger ones, do have the card games, which everybody loves, Supposedly you're not supposed to be playing against the house. You're supposed to be playing with each other. And they just get a little percent for allowing that to, having the dealer and all that stuff. It's very complicated. And the amount of money that went into that campaign to get the gambling and lottery passed versus the people that were against it couldn't overcome that. Couldn't even touch it. And so that was a huge disappointment. But, so now, that's the way it's going to be for a while. And the amount of money that Indian tribes have put into campaigns is phenomenal. And they don't have to report to the Ethics Commission because they are sovereign nations and are special and are outside. And that might be an area in ethics that we need to attend to as to during session, money should not be exchanged when legislation is up. So that's the argument on that side. And, the other side has their argument too. But David will be very, very much in that area. And he is very adamant that he is going to see if he can get this ad valorem freeze for seniors passed through the legislature. And he also feels that this 5% annual increase in ad valorem taxes for everybody is almost like conscription in that we have no say, we have nobody explains why they need the increase. And he says, if they explain to us, they have to be accountable and show us, that's one thing. But 5% is pretty strong. And so he'd like to see that lowered. And then let each county justify why we need to do it. If it's for the schools, like when we did maps, the people voted for that. When we were explained how it was going to be set up, who was accountable, how the money was going to go, what they were going to do. And they've done what they said they would do, so we passed maps too. So again, if you can give people reasons for why you either need to raise their taxes or whatever, I think people respond. And so anyway, he'll be that direction. I was more in the education direction and couldn't do much with the ad valorem or the ethics. So those will be his strengths.
Sounds like we still need you in there.
Oh,
I'll
I'll tell you what, we've got some good ones there. The thing I hadn't mentioned is I always viewed myself as a citizen legislator. And I think there are two kind of politicians out at the legislature.
Mhm.
There are the career politicians, and there are the citizen type politicians that don't view that as their job in life, for life, or whatever. And there's some that's their job, and that's their life and their world. And their number one thing is to see that they get reelected because they want to be there. And this legislature right now in the House has some really good people who have been out in life, had businesses, raised families, paid unemployment taxes, paid Social Security for other people that they hire. And it's such a different group of different careers coming together, and they have so much to offer. And
not all attorneys have.
that's right. That is right. I mean, one fella is in the carpet cleaning business. One has been a retired fire chief. And one was a farmer. He is paralyzed from here down and got elected. He's from Enid. Got a piece of new equipment, a 3-wheeler, and it turned over on him. He and David sit in the back of the chamber together. And he is remarkable because he is very handicapped, but boy, that doesn't slow him down. So we have some really good people out there.
Well, you commented earlier that there was a difference between the girls, the women couldn't ask the guys out to go to dinner or something. Now that David's in, well, he'll be able to do that a little bit more than you could.
Oh, listen, I can see the networking. They'll call and David will say, well, let's go to lunch tomorrow. And if I were going to meet a man for something, I would take David with me. Now, maybe I'm old-fashioned, and maybe it's the generation gap again. But I can remember one time after session was over, I was talking on the floor with the one I told you was my student when I was a teacher and he was in junior high. And I mean, people were up asking, what have they got going, or something like that, I mean, think how much younger he is than I am. But, and it might be different as more women are there now. But at the time I first started out, I mean, well, right before I went out there, the women didn't even have a separate bathroom for the House members, At one end, there was a bathroom for the men, but there wasn't for women. So then they took a closet out and put a women's bathroom in there. And then by the time I ended my career, we had a brand new one bathroom when I started. We had two in there. So it's kind of interesting how things are changing. And but the networking, I think there are some women now who have come in together that they're kind of with each other, but we're still in such a minority that, it's not part of the bigger picture necessarily. Now, that's just my opinion. You might get a different view for some that are newer elected than I am. But not a week goes by that one of these freshman legislators calls David.
They didn't do that with.
And no, the three of us, we didn't call each other. And now, by the time my last few years, we would call on legislation. We started calling, and so I think it's changed quite a bit now. And it was shocking to me the last year I was in the House. The speaker asked me to come up and sit in the chair there at the very end, the last week or so. If he had to make a phone call or, maybe go to the bathroom or whatever, he'd send somebody down and ask me if I'd come sit in the chair, and he did that. 2 or 3 different times. And then another one who was our floor majority leader. And the majority leader, all the legislation goes through him. So he controls what's coming up next and what's going to be heard tomorrow and all that. He came over to me the last day and said, would you feel comfortable speaking for us on commending the speaker for this session and his hard work? Because it was really a difficult end of session, the last one that I was in. I said, sure, I'll do it. I'll try to do it. You know, when they say it's 5 o'clock and it's over, they usually throw papers out and everybody's talking and you never get their attention again. But everybody quieted down and I was able to say some things about what he had accomplished and done for us, and that as the House we should have, and we did appreciate what he had done on our behalf, because he spoke for all of us when he went and negotiated. Mm-hmm. So I saw a marked difference from when I first got there and at the end.
I'd say there was a marked difference in how you felt that day versus the first time you presented the bill.
Oh, I felt so intimidated the first time. And I thought I was the only one that felt that way. And it was hard to understand, because when you've taught, I was in education for 28 years. And you're up in front of kids all the time. I could not understand it. But it is so different, and it's extremely intimidating. And I found out that wasn't just me. It's true. Even some of the ones that are freshmen right now have commented about, that. Very nerve-wracking. And you don't know what questions are going to be thrown at you. And they're always harder on the freshmen to tease them. But I was thrown a curve. I had a simple little bill. It wasn't changing anything. It didn't have any money in it. It was just the osteopath doctors wanted to change a couple of their rules. And one of my own Republicans who had been there for a long time came up and said, you don't mind if I put an amendment on that bill, do you? Well, being one of my cohorts, supposedly on the same side as I, and everything, I said, well, no, that'd be okay. And in those days, you could go up there and just put an amendment up there. And then everybody would be told what it is, and then you'd vote on it. Nobody knew what amendments were up there and what we were going to vote on. Now you have to do it a few days in advance so everybody can see it, which is much more orderly. But the osteopaths about blew up when they found out what he was doing. And of course, it ended up being voted down. But they said, what happened out there? And so this little simple thing turned into a problem. So anyway, that was the hardest bill I think I ever did.
At the end of the day, you were glad to have your cup of hot chocolate or whatever.
I was just glad when the vote was over and I could sit down.
Did you have to change? This is a woman question, I guess. Did you have to buy a new wardrobe?
I did upgrade my wardrobe because I wanted the people I represented to be proud of me. And my husband was good enough to spend more money than I was used to spending, because I was always very frugal. He calls me cheap, and I say I'm frugal, very frugal. And so I did buy some very practical type of suits. And I have watched some of the other women that have been elected upgrade their wardrobes as they're going along. It's been interesting to watch. But if you're going to be in that kind of a position, you need to look professional, is what I've learned.
Well, some of them have said it's so they could stay warm when they were in the chamber.
Well, it's darn cold in there. That's true, too, because I learned to always buy long sleeves. And in the winter, I usually had many different kinds of turtlenecks. Because the men, most of them wear long sleeve shirts and then their coats over it, and then they turn on the fans, So even though there's a lot of hot air in there, it doesn't counteract.
Well, I've covered a lot of things. Is there anything I haven't asked that I need to cover? Have you stayed in touch with any of the women that you've served with?
Yes, that's one advantage of having David there, is I run into him from time to time.
But any close friendships of it?
that I would call and just say, hi, how are you doing, that kind of thing. Not really. Although, as I think, there are a couple that I've called to go to lunch with, from time to time. So I think that does count, and in their busy schedule and what mine has been. And I'll tell you truthfully, too, I think I'd be more comfortable doing it now, but I tried to do what David did for me. He stayed away and kept us separated. For years, he didn't come out there, really. And then the last year, he'd kind of come up to my office a little bit and hang around, I've tried to kind of stay out of his way, too, and not even give any suggestion that I'm trying to tell him what to do. So I've purposely it's his thing, But he always includes me for dinners he sets up or lunches. And if they bring their wives, I have now become acquainted and forming friendships with wives of legislators, which is a new area that I'm very much enjoying.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there's something else, my last question is I can't do that yet. We need to know what you've done since leaving office. Then I'll do my last one. Since leaving office, I have become the person who is running the business. We have a Dank consulting business, and so we have one secretary. It's a small organization, but that's what I've been doing day in and day out. Okay. So now I'm a businesswoman. Yeah. And you still get up early, huh? Yes, indeed. Not quite as early, but still have to get it. And not as much reading then. Oh, I think I ruined my eyes out there. I really do. I'm just denying the fact that maturity sets in and you eventually have to wear glasses. I don't know if you've worn them all your life, have you? I have, yeah. 4th grade. Oh, well. Yeah. I started out in about 6 years into the deal, I was wearing, the reading glasses. But now it's full time. Well, my last question then is, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say? It doesn't have to be just about legislature. It could be about whatever you wish. Well, I guess I would like to think that people approved of what I've done in the several careers I've had. And that I have not been an arrogant, know-it-all, egotistical person, but rather somebody who has tried to listen and be humble and appreciate and ever grateful for the opportunities I've had in my life that have just been remarkable. I just think I've been so fortunate and blessed, and you wonder why, Mm-hmm. But I hope I've been a good mother and a good grandmother and a good wife and a good legislator and a good educator. And, from time to time you get a little feedback if you run into a former student and they actually remember you and say something nice without any prodding or anything. Then I think I get some idea maybe I've been able to have a chance to make a mark in somebody's life. And I just mainly hope that everybody to whom I've been responsible would be proud of what I've done. And that's been my main goal. I'd say you've achieved that. Time will tell, I tell you. Time has already told. Oh, you're most kind. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.